Okay, we are going to look a little more at formatting documents. So we've got assignment 9 here. We're going to go through some of the different um, formatting tools. Please make sure that you wait until it's time to pause the video before you complete any of the tasks that you see in the video. All right, so the first thing is actually some review. So let's take a look at this first set of instructions. Place the cursor above the words indents, line spacing, margins, and tabs below. Type your first and last name. Write align your name. Center the title. Bold the title. Delete the instructions when you're done. So where it says place the cursor above the words indents, line, and spacing, we're talking about here. So you'll place your cursor and then go ahead and complete these instructions. Now, one little side note, depending on how large your window is, you may not see all the tools that you need. If you're missing a tool, little side note, these little 3 dots says more. If I click, I have more options pop up below. That happens when you change the size of your window. If it's too big or too small, you might get the more option. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, next up. All right, so sorry about that. I wanted to make sure that I am doing this along with you. Okay, so our next section right here says format the following paragraphs as they are described below. Be sure the cursor is active within the paragraph before you attempt to format it. So what that means is if we're working on the formatting for this paragraph, you'll want to make sure your cursor is inside this paragraph. Okay, sometimes it tells you exactly where to put it. Other times you just want it somewhere within that area. So continue reading these with me. When adding indents and spacing to your documents, you should never push the spacebar or tab key more than once. If you think you have more than pushing the spacebar or tab once, you need to use some skills that you're going to learn today. Here's what that means. If I want you to center something, okay, let's pretend for a second that this first sentence I want centered. Pushing the spacebar until it looks like it's in the middle is the wrong way to do it. Not okay. You should never push the spacebar more than once, most of the time. Once in a blue moon, there's a different situation, but pushing the spacebar more than once is not what you're going to do. Because if you think about it, it took me 15 seconds to get this kind of in the middle. And so let's pretend that I'm spacebarring it. I think that looks like center. Well, now what happens when I make the font? I decide, well, I want that bigger. Now it's not centered anymore because I use the spacebar. It's not how we do it. Okay, let's undo. If I use the center button, that was a split second is all it took. It was less work to make it centered. And if I want to change the font, it keeps my doc or my text centered. So that's one big thing that is a problem for students is not using the tools to make their text formatted. If you're pushing the space bar or the tab key more than once, you're probably doing something wrong. So it's very, very, very important. So what I want you to do is make this sentence bold and read it to yourself. Now delete this paragraph. Okay, next up, This is an indented paragraph. An indented paragraph begins with the first line indented 1/2 inch. There are two ways to indent a paragraph. The first is to place the cursor at the beginning of the paragraph and push the tab key. So you're going to click your cursor at the beginning of the paragraph. You'll see it blinking right here. And push the tab key once. Now let's look at our second indent option. This is also an indented paragraph. The second method for indenting is to set the paragraph up in the ruler. To set the paragraph style, place the cursor at the beginning of the paragraph and drag the indent marker to the right 1/2 inch. Okay, so tab works fine if you know you want 1/2 inch indent. This method I'm going to show you next is a little more complicated in a sense that it's probably something you haven't done before, but it actually makes things a lot easier, and I'll show you why in a minute. So the directions say place the cursor at the beginning of the paragraph and drag the indent marker, the blue rectangle on the ruler. Should say to the right 1/2 inch. Okay, so here's what we'll do. Click the cursor at the beginning. Now we're talking about this little rectangle up here. You can see me clicking. Now we have a rectangle with a triangle underneath. Okay, these are two different things here. We want to grab the little rectangle up top. Do you see how when I drag to the right, it comes apart? The other thing you'll see is that there in the black box is the measurement. So you see now it says 0.50, that's 1/2, right? So I'm going to drag this over to 1/2 and let go. And it indents my paragraph. Now you might be thinking, well, that's stupid. Why not just push tab? And you're right. If that's where you want your indent, you should definitely push tab. But what if you wanted your indent a little bit smaller? For whatever reason, this was just how you wanted to format. Or maybe you wanted it a little bigger. So this gives you the option to have it not just be 1/2 inch. I want you to make it 1/2 inch, but it gives you options. All right. Next up. Sometimes you want to indent the entire paragraph instead of just the first line. This is helpful for setting paragraphs apart from the rest of the text in a document, so you want it to kind of stand out a little bit more or look like its own section. Okay, so to do this, place the cursor at the beginning of the paragraph and click the Increase Indent command on the toolbar. This command adds indents in 1/2, in 1/2 inch increments. Add 1/2 inch indent to the paragraph. Okay, so here's what we do. Place our cursor at the beginning, and we're going to look up at our toolbar, and I don't see it right away, so I'm going to go to More. We're looking for these commands. Okay, if you see how the text actually looks like it's long and then it's indented here, and it says Increase Indent, that's what we want. Click that button and it pops it inside. You've probably seen text like this before. Okay, a lot of times it happens if you're on a discussion board and you're seeing replies to people, things kind of indent. Okay. It's the quickest way to indent an entire paragraph. And this goes by 1/2 inch increments. So you can play around with these two buttons and see how it behaves. The other thing to notice, look up at our toolbar up here, or at our ruler. Okay, watch this, the little triangle and rectangle as I indent in and out. You see how that moves? Okay, instead of using these buttons, you could actually grab by the triangle and move it yourself. So if you wanted something that wasn't perfect increments, you could actually drag by the triangle. So take a few minutes and play around with the indent tool, but make sure that this paragraph right here is indented 1/2 inch. All right, next up. A justified paragraph is very simple to format. It's used to keep columns from getting or having ragged edges in newsletters, and it makes a very clean looking page. Unfortunately, it also leaves large spaces between words, sometimes because the length of some words in the line, especially narrow columns. To format this kind of paragraph, place the cursor at the beginning and click Justify. So if you've ever looked at a newspaper or a magazine, you'll know that you've seen Justify before. So it tells us to place the cursor at the beginning of the paragraph, and we're going to go look up the alignment tools. Now, sometimes your alignment tools are already laid out on the toolbar. Other times you have to click the drop down. And again, that depends on how large or small your window is. But if I hover, I'm looking for Justify. And it's cool because you can see the text kind of emulates what it'll look like. So I'll click Justify. And in this case, if I click and unclick, I go to left, then I go back to Justify. You see how like my spacing here looks like it's more than one space, but my words are all nice and lined up. Okay, so depending on what words are used in the paragraph, it could be much more spread out or not. All right, next up. Read this paragraph with me. Sometimes you want to align part of your text, but not all of it. Adding a tab stop will easily align your text. Usually you would see this on a menu or a table of contents. To insert a tab stop, select the lines you have the text you need to align. Click your mouse on the ruler where you want to line the text up and click. Choose left tab stop. Then place your cursor in front of the text you want to move and click tab. Okay, so here's what we're talking about. If we look at the price on a menu, okay, a lot of times this is when a tab stop would be used. Now, I want you to just watch for a second. See how I have hamburger $2. Okay, if I were to hit tab, I can actually move my price. So, let's say somebody looked at this and they're like, okay, well, if I hit tab a couple times, see how everything lines up? And that's great. And you might be thinking, well, I didn't have to do anything fancy. I just pushed tab. Well, now I did push tab. Let's back this up for a second. I had to push tab, once, twice. However, with cheeseburger, I only typed it once. Everything seems fine right now, but if I were to try to make my text larger, do you see how now my numbers aren't lined up again? So if I go in and I'm like, oh geez, all right, I'll add another tab. Well, now if I want to make everything smaller again, it's off again. So we run into this situation where because I'm hitting tab more than once, the minute I change my formatting in another way, everything gets messed up. So let's back up. We're going to use a tab stop. Okay, again, sometimes pushing tab works. A lot of times you're going to end up running into trouble. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to highlight the text. So now I'm not just clicking the cursor, I'm going to highlight all of the text that has something that I need to line up. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go up to my ruler. Okay, and I'm going to pick a number that's away from everything. So we'll go for 3 inches. I'm going to click my mouse and I get some options. Now these different tabs, what happens is left tab stop means everything's going to line up on the left. Center means it'll line up in the middle of where I click, and right means it'll go to the right. The center and the right, once in a while you will use. Most of the time, it'll be left. So click Add Left Tab Stop. And what you'll see is a little blue triangle gets added. Now, if I click in my paragraph, there's no little blue triangle. But if I click by hamburger, you see the blue triangle, cheeseburger, hot dog come out, and there's nothing. So that shows me that the tab stop was applied to these sections. So now what you do is you click right in front of the $ and hit tab once. And it lines us up. Cheeseburger, hit it once. Hot dog, click, hit tab once. Now, no matter how big or small I make my text, everything stays lined up. Now, if I went crazy and chose something like 72, I might have to adjust the tab stop, but it's very rare that that will happen. Now, if you decide that you don't want the tab stop, you click and drag down and the tab stop disappears. I just hit undo. Okay. So you can take a tab stop out if you don't like it or want it by just clicking and dragging. All right. Next up, changing the margins is another way to change the look of your document. You don't need to select any text, and your cursor can be placed anywhere. Click on the File menu, choose Page Setup. You'll see the margin measurements on the right side of the window. Margins are usually set to 1 inch. Change all margins to 1/2 inch. So usually with papers and things that you're supposed to write, 1 inch is accepted. But for some reason, if you want the margins to be different, we go to File, Page Setup, and change all of your margins to 0.5. I'm pushing tab to go between boxes, but you can just take your mouse and click 0.5. This is also where you can change the orientation if you want to make it landscape, if you want to change the paper size, if you want to change the page color. All we're changing are margins, and click OK. Now, if you notice, the area around the edge of my paper is now a whole lot different. Finally, increasing the line space between lines of text make your document easier to read. Select all of the text on this page and click the line spacing button. Explore the different spacing options. Choose a line spacing option that keeps this document on one page. Okay, so here it says select all text. So I can do that. I can click at the end and I can drag up and let go. Sometimes dragging is difficult, so I could say edit, select all. One thing to notice to the right are my shortcuts. I'm on a Mac, so you see this little squiggle button. On a PC, it would be Control. So I could say Control A for select all. Somehow get everything selected. And then for the line spacing, this button is my line spacing command. I have a lot of options. I can go single. Single tends to be hard to read, but there are definitely times that's appropriate. 1.5 is a pretty typical spacing option. The only thing about 1.5 is everything's on 2 pages. I need 1 page. Double is definitely out of the question. So let's go 1.15. Some other things that you can choose. Add space before paragraphs. So let's see what that does. Okay, that gives me extra spacing between my paragraphs. Okay. Now, in this case, we have an actual space in between. But if I took that out, do you see how the add space between actually gives, there's no cursor in between. It just gives a little space. Okay. We can always remove the extra space. We can add space after paragraphs, which actually looks exactly the same as add space before. But there are reasons for each of these options. And you can also do custom spacing. Most of the time you won't do that. Most of the time you'll choose one of these options. So make sure everything fits on one page, and then you're done.